Colleagues, without further ado, let me welcome you to this discussion on clean energy, which is also a discussion of the very strong nexus in this area between India and Norway, and I hope it's a nexus that would become stronger in the years to come. We are very fortunate to have a group of very eminent and distinguished people with us here to lead the discussion. On my right is Mr. Lars Lunde, the Deputy Minister for Energy in Norway. We also have Mr. Anil Razdan, former Secretary Power to the Government of India. We have Mr. Sanjeev Mehra here. We have Sushant Chatterjee, Rahul Varshne, my colleague Mr. Ramanathan. Pooja, welcome. And in the discussion today, we focus largely on the question of renewables. Both modern renewables, wind and solar, as well as the traditional renewable which we have had for a long time, hydro, which of course is an area where Norway has had a long lead. So what we would like to do is to focus the discussion today on how can we maximize the amount of renewables in our energy mix. Mr. Lunde, it's wonderful to have you here. I'm extremely proud of the partnership that we have with Norway in the energy area. Could I request you to share your thoughts with us as far as this session is concerned, and also as far as the longer-term relationships are concerned?
Thank you very much, Dr. Mathur. It's a great pleasure for me to be here today and to have the opportunity to speak here at the World Sustainable Development Summit, and especially on this session. I have been here in Delhi on the WSDS, as it was called that time before, 2 times before, and actually I always leave from here with a lot of impressions and new knowledge from this summit. And I congratulate Terry for creating this important dialogue forum. And indeed, this summit is taking place in a very interesting and important time in history. I think we're witnessing the greatest shift in technology since the first industrial revolution, especially in the energy sector. In the first industrial revolution, we changed from muscle power into the steam engine based on fossil fuel. Today, we see a shift from fossil fuels, from the combustion engine, into alternative new renewable energy sources. I mean, indeed, what we're witnessing today, and what I would like to highlight today, is the really rapid energy transformation and the growth of disruptive energy technology and disruptive markets. I mean, we see that indicative solar costs over time has been dramatically reduced from where it was a few years ago. And the renewable energy sources are actually now, in reality, competitive with other traditional fossil energy sources. Some years ago, alternative energy was regarded as an unrealistic vision. But today we see that at least 90% of growth in global generation is renewable. More than 150 gigawatt renewable energy was installed in 2015. This is a new record and an increase of 8% since 2014. So we're really witnessing a great change and a great growth in renewable energy, especially in solar and wind. In addition to that, we can also notice that battery costs has decreased significantly. And in addition, the effectiveness of the batteries has increased. So it's both an increase in production of solar power and wind power combined with a decrease in the cost of battery costs. So we can also store the energy because, as you know, wind and solar power has the disadvantage that you depend on the sun has to be shining and the wind has to be blowing. So when you also can combine this with the possibility of storing energy, it's really creating a great change. And we also see that installation of energy-efficient technology, like the LED, reduces the demand for electricity substantially without compromising the energy services that they provide. The implication of this is that the task of installing necessary power capacity will not be so overwhelming as we maybe thought a few years ago. Digitalization provides new opportunities to manage the energy supply and our energy consumption. And it's really fascinating to see how smartphones have spread around the world. And with this development in renewable energy, the lowering of cost and the battery technology, we see that the challenge that we faced a few years ago that seemed impossible, which is to match the increasing demand for energy, especially in the developing world, with the need to reduce climate emissions of greenhouse gases. That was thought as an almost impossible task a few years ago, but now we see it is possible to increase, to meet growing energy demand at the same time as we manage to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions, thanks to these new energy technologies. Last year, the United Nations adopted the Sustainable Development Goals. Goal number 7 by 2030 is to ensure universal access to affordable, reliable, and modern energy services. This is ambitious, as we know today that about 1.2 billion people in the world lack access to energy services. And to avoid greenhouse gas emissions, energy efficiencies, and renewable energy is necessary. And what we see here in India, as well as in many other countries, are rich renewable energy sources. In developing countries, bioenergy is a traditional dominant energy source, but also solar energy is available in every country. Not so much in my country, but here in India and other countries we see much solar energy, while locations also for hydropower and wind power are present in some countries and regions. In countries with rainy seasons and dry seasons, we see that solar energy and other renewable energy sources can be complementary. I believe that disruptive technologies and reduced costs offer a big opportunity for India as well as for other countries. And I'm more optimistic now when I access the opportunities to achieve this sustainable development goal. India is an advanced country when it comes to, for instance, information and communications technology. However, we know also that new technology will not automatically be available for the poor. We need financing and we need business models to ensure this. Investors need instruments to mitigate the risks, and providers and consumers need loans and guarantees. I have seen very good models, among others also here in India. Local banks are unable to provide credits and loans, and I hope that these positive experiences can contribute to a scaling up of the efforts to install increased capacity of renewable energy in India as well as in other countries. And as I said previously, the beauty is that renewable energy simultaneously provides people with energy sources and at the same time avoid greenhouse gas emissions. It is therefore of great importance that poor people don't have incentives to use diesel aggregates for their energy supply. The ambitious renewable energy targets here in India and the strong renewable energy deployment that we have seen so far are very impressive. Norway and Norwegian renewable energy enterprises follow the Indian market opportunities closely. And we already have a presence in the hydro and solar power sectors, and we hope to contribute to the Indian renewable energy growth, be it through conventional or newer technologies. After the successful Paris Agreement in December last year, it is now of utmost importance that we together implement the measures indicated in the National Determined Contributions, the NDCs, and I believe that the disruptive technologies in energy can really help us a lot with achieving this goal. So thank you very much, and again, thank you for organizing this session.
Thank you very much. May I say, Mr. Minister, that as far as we are concerned, we look forward to this greater collaboration on the development of infrastructure, but also on the softer side, which is how do you get all of this in, how do you develop the capacities, and how do we create the kinds of policy and regulatory structures which can bring this larger capacity in. I'm not going to add anything more, but what I'm going to request Ms. Hane Melgore is to steer our conversations as we go ahead. So I know I'm putting you at a sudden risk, but can I request you to moderate this discussion as we go ahead?
Thank you. Yes, it was a sudden surprise. I'll do my best. We have the Deputy Minister here until 9:45, and I would try to ask you to have a discussion with him before he leaves. So it's open for questions for everybody or comments to his speech. You just have to raise your hand. Yes.
I think, Deputy Minister, this is a very good initiative for India and Norway in respect of the new renewables. But I would request, as I was telling you separately, that Norway has great capabilities even in larger hydro. That is the original renewable. And as you are going to add more and more solar and wind, you will need this balancing power. There are two options, either to go into gas-based compensating stations or for storage hydro or pumped hydro. The small renewables have their own advantage, but they also have their limitations because you cannot install very large transmission systems to balance the larger national grids. We have a very large national grid in the country, one of the largest in the world. For that, I think we will need some medium to large size hydro also to come in, as I mentioned, particularly storage and pumped storage. And Norway, with its expertise, particularly, I think, in helping us in the tough geological and unpredictable terrains, would, I think, be an appropriate partner in expediting projects in an environmentally and ecologically safe manner. So that is one request I thought I could make. The other is storage and sustainable habitats in those areas where you are going to install these smaller packets of new renewables. Those people should not in any way feel that they are inferior in terms of comforts or other attainments or opportunities as compared to those who have got grid power. And rooftop solar is another push, 40 gigawatt target. And rooftop solar will have its few problems of net metering, integration. So it is a pretty vast area, and it will have its challenges. It will also have its challenges in integrating these intermittent sources of power into a grid system. So my only request is that I think we will need to enlarge the scope of our cooperation into areas which look a little beyond this very mini or micro-sized developments.
Mudassar from the state of Jammu and Kashmir. Honorable Minister, our state, we particularly have a huge potential in the small and mini and micro capability. It has not been doing well due to various concerns. The policy measures and everything are being straightened out. There has been quite a bit of development over the last decade since it's been opened up. But because it's a new state as far as the smaller and newer renewable factors can come in, I think it's a huge opportunity as well to work together for Norway and for us to learn how to ecologically do it, to maintain the balance, because it's very important. So I think there's a huge scope, but because of issues which you touched upon and you were very clear about, specifically the financing part specifically to get the right models in. We do have a couple of projects running, and we hopefully are perfectly fine, but we want to take it, scale it up to the next level. And there's a huge opportunity, and I had requested my minister as well to hopefully visit you officially so that we could work out a parameter and chart out a more sustainable route in terms of small hydro, mini hydro, and micro. So I would like to touch upon that later in the session, probably. Thank you.
Thank you. To summarize these two inventions now, we had, well, what I'm hearing is that everybody's asking for more. And we have present also people from Norwegian Statkraft and from Innovation Norway, and I encourage you to answer to that after the State Secretary, of course. But the first one was that the wish for larger projects, roof solars and storage, and also the next one was about the same. So go ahead.
Yeah, thank you very much for your interesting and good comments. Yeah, indeed, large and medium-sized hydro plays an important part. I mean, in Norway we have got we got 98–99% of our electricity production is from hydropower, and hydropower is not a new energy source in Norway. We've had it for more than 100 years, and it's, as I said, it's very important in the Norwegian electricity system. And the beauty of large, medium-sized hydro with dams is the possibility to store energy, unlike solar and wind power and even small-scale hydro. Because of the magazines, you even have the possibility to pump water back into the dams because of that. And we see that's plays an really extra value on hydropower in Norway, this capability to act in a way as a battery or as a storage capacity. We see that it is acts very well together with solar and wind power, because when the wind is not blowing and the sun is not shining, we can tap the dams and produce hydropower, and at the same time, when the sun is shining or the wind is blowing, we can even use the energy to pump back and at least save water in the dams. And we see it in Norway. We can also act together with our neighbors like Germany, who has a big solar and wind power capacity, to use Norwegian hydropower as a balancing power with Germany. We need to build some more cables and so on, but of course this really puts an extra value on hydropower with them. So that's absolutely right. It will continue to play an important role, and even a more important role because of this storage capacity. And also, you're also absolutely right when you mentioned this small-scale roof solar panels, which I think you have great potential here in India. I mean, a big country with sun is shining much more than in my home country, definitely, and also to combine with lower battery costs, so you can use batteries at night when the sun is not shining. So indeed, I think it's a really big possibility, and especially because you saved all the investment that you would otherwise have to do in the grids, and I know this is a big challenge for India to build grids. And of course, using this local solar power on the roof, you save a lot in investments in grid. You probably have to invest in grid anyway, but at least it saves much of the investment. So I think that's really a good idea, because you have a lot of sun, and the battery technology is becoming more and more accessible. And about also the same, of course, also small-scale hydro is important. We have been building a lot of small-scale hydro in Norway recently, mainly because we have already used much of our capacity for the large-scale hydro. So now we're moving into also more small-scale. But of course, also hydro has its challenges when you have to combine it with taking care of biodiversity, and of course also the people living there. I don't think we cannot do like in China, moving millions of people away and building a big dam. This is not something I think neither India or Norway will be able to do. So indeed we have to build hydro, but of course we have a long history in Norway of combining hydropower with taking care of other important environmental issues, like taking care of the biodiversity and the species living in the area where you build hydropower. So thank you very much.
Please.
Morning, just one short question. We all really look at the great achievements you have made on the hydro front, and also the contribution you are making for the renewable energy market in the whole of Europe. My question was, a few years back, the International Hydro Association had come out with a sustainability guidelines and sustainability protocol. What has been your experience with that protocol or those guidelines? Because we could address some of the concerns we are having in India also on the environmental and social issues.
Yes, I mean, we have quite strong guidelines in Norway how to combine hydropower with environmental measures and other concerns. So we have a good cooperation with the Minister of Energy, who is responsible for this guideline to combine the different environmental issues. I don't know exactly the status now, but this is something we also are addressing in our biodiversity action plan for the biodiversity convention that also the Parliament decided this year, how to take care of our biodiversity at the same time as we are building hydropower.
The next one, please. Anybody else?
I'm Shishir Tamotia from Jupiter Oxygen. Do you have any technology? Because you see, I was looking at yesterday's report of the Central Electricity Authority on the power generation. We still do more than 85% of energy through coal. Now, whatever we do, the peaking load has got to come through the fossil fuels by either natural gas or something. Now, is there any technology that is available which could use for smaller generators fossil fuels in a manner that, say for example, we have a smaller coal-fired generators which can be used as a peaking load? Because that is what is going to be the biggest problem. All the renewable energies are practically base loads. You have no option but to run it when it is available. I think the biggest problem that is going to be there in the country is the peaking load. Do you have any such technology which could be used for converting either coal or some other fossil resource?
I mean, hydropower you can use to handle the peak load because it have the storage capacity. But when you also, of course, have gas power, you also can regulate quite easily. We don't have so much gas-fired power in Norway, but in Europe they're also using gas-fired power to balance the solar and wind power, which you have to use when it's there and cannot store it. Of course, you also, but because of course you still have fossil fuels, and I mean to make it clean. I mean we are also working on carbon capture and storage, also in Norway, to make the fossil fuels clean in case you have to use them. But I think both hydropower and gas power, at least gas is cleaner than coal, has the possibility to handle peak power, because it's easy to regulate, and hydropower with dams is the most easy to regulate. I mean, just how much you tap down the water, but also gas you can quite easily turn off and off. And like for instance, nuclear, who is basically functioning as a base power.
Thank you, Deputy Minister. If we don't have any more questions, we are moving into the next in the agenda here, and that is promoting renewable through mandatory and voluntary trading mechanism. And we have Mr. Sirish Garud, Director, Energy, Environment, Technology Development Division in TERE. Do we? There you are.
Yeah. Thank you very much. Very good morning to all of you. Well, I have prepared a brief presentation on this. Is being loaded, although it is a little bigger, but I will try to remain in the time limits because we are already running late. Next. Well, it's basically a quick snapshot of India's electricity. Mainly we are focusing on renewable energy. In this first case is, of course, the power generation through renewables. So out of about 304 gigawatt total installed capacity, we have renewable about 44 gigawatt, and we still have a large number in thermal. That's about 187 gigawatt of thermal power, mostly coming from coal. very little from gas or other areas. As far as renewables are concerned, it is still dominated by wind energy, which had started, in 1990s for grid-connected applications. So it's still about around 27 gigawatt. But solar, which really started for grid-connected applications somewhere around 2000 and 2008 afterwards, it is picking up very fast, and it's right now around almost 8 gigawatt, which was hardly few megawatt in 2010. So it's rapidly increasing. Biomass around 5 megawatt, and small hydro, which is less than 25 megawatt. That's how we define small hydro without dam. So that is around 4.3 megawatt of renewables. Next, please. As you can see, the exponential growth which which has been planned for till 2022, about 175 gigawatt of renewables coming online, with 100 gigawatt. Next, please. 100 gigawatt of it will come from solar, and 60 gigawatt from wind, around 10 gigawatt from biomass, and 5 gigawatt from small hydro. So there is still large scope for small hydro to come. And also for solar energy, again, there are 3-4 major segments, market segments. One is, of course, large-scale grid-connected power plants through solar park schemes. That's about 20 gigawatt. And then there is another 30 gigawatt which will come through the government itself, demand for buildings, government buildings, the land which is available with railways or defense and other public sector initiatives. Interestingly, there is a 40 gigawatt of solar rooftop which is being planned, and that is going to be one of the, it's a challenging, but it is also very interesting market which will develop. And then there will be again another 10 gigawatt of solar parks are being planned. Next, please. So, if you look at it, the Ministry of New and Renewable Energies solar photovoltaic program, if you look at it, it has all components. Probably one can get across the globe. That's grid connected, rooftop, small off-grid systems, solar pumping, village electrification through smart grids or mini grids, and so on and so forth. Next, please. Fortunately, we had a very good, working collaboration with Norwegian Ministry of Foreign Affairs and TERI from 2008 to 2013. And I will just briefly, go through some of the components of it. So the collaboration was basically, to address some concerns about climate change and energy security. India's National Action Plan on Climate Change and Energy Security Concerns. And so merging both these things, it needs more collective action and multi-actor responses, and also dedicated research and financing. And that's what this framework agreement worth around 60 crores over this 5 years period between Norwegian government. I think this is one of the unique example of how the developed countries can really support capacity building plus technology transfer plus project implementation and a very systematic approach and programmatic approach. And I'm happy to mention that second phase of such framework agreement has been approved by both the government of India and Norwegian government, and will be embarking upon the second phase also. So quickly, next please. Quickly going through, we identified 3 major areas in this framework agreement. One is clean energy options, mainly for rural applications, climate change and energy security, and climate change interfaces. And of course, building capacity and catalyzing actions were the one of the main objectives. But in clean energy, we looked at both the cooking energy clean energy, microgrids, mini grids, capacity building, and also, livelihood generation through clean energy options. So some of the examples I will just quickly go through before probably chair will ask me to stop. Next, please. What happened with this agreement is it helped us in strengthening policy perspective on climate change and energy security, and we carried out various research. I'm not going through all the things, but can you please go next? We also had a big dissemination of activities, mass communication through peer-reviewed journals, through website, through newsletters, and so on and so forth. And of course, a large number of capacity building events were also carried out in this programmatic approach. Next, please. What we gained? We gained a lot of capacity building happened not only for TERI staff, but also our associates, our partners in the field like NGOs and others. We have high involvement of women in this activity also, and it also enabled investment in capital equipment to support the work, because we had a lot of project installations in the field, about 30 microgrids. There were a couple of smart utility for livelihood generation, and also we established our solar lab for lighting product testing. So it is not only implementation but also quality of implementation. And this lab is today now I'm happy to tell you that this is now enable accredited lab, for probably only one of its kind except some government labs. And we are also now exploring possibility of expanding its scope. We have a huge investment in these labs, and some of the projects which I can just show you a couple of quick photographs. This is what we call as smart utility unit, which is installed in rural part of Assam, where we have about 5 kilowatt solar PV system, which is supplying power to the equipments which can be used by the community for livelihood generation. Next, please. So it is basically to design, test and customize clean energy technologies for livelihood generation activities. And this is one demonstration. Of course, we have a couple of others also in Orissa and I think in MP. And these are, I think, are something which are scalable globally, because what we are looking at is creating a facility which can be used by people, so that the rural people do not have to invest in the facility, but they are it's kind of a service provider for those people, and mainly designed around their local needs or local livelihood generation opportunities. For example, in Assam it is bamboo splitting or turmeric grinding and other activities. In Odisha, it is something related to pottery and other things. So that is something which is very interesting part of this. I think I will have to stop here, but I must thank Innovation Norway, Norway Embassy of Norway, and the officials here for giving us this opportunity and giving us this support. Thank you very much.
I assure you it's a pleasure. I have been asked to do some changes in this program now, because there has been changes in other programs during this day. So now we will go straight to Dominic Martin. Yes, please go ahead.
Thank you very much, and it's great to be here speaking to you all today on clean energy. And I represent a company called Statoil, and you may be asking, why is a company which has oil in its name speaking in a seminar on clean energy? And that's what I'm going to try and prove to you today, that it is possible to be a traditional oil and gas company, or have your roots as a traditional oil and gas company, but still be thinking about how you address this very serious challenge that faces our societies today. For those of you who don't know Statoil, let me just explain a little bit about what we are as a company. In many ways, it's I think for this audience, the way to think about Statoil is that we are the equivalent of the ONGC of Norway. We are, because of our presence on the Norwegian continental shelf, the bits of the North Sea and the other seas around Norway, we're actually the largest offshore oil operator in the world today. And we also have substantial presences in other countries like Brazil, the United States, in Africa and in other countries. We are one of the largest exporters of gas because Norway, as we heard from the Minister, basically consumes power through hydro and so exports its gas. And we're also one of the biggest oil traders. So we come from a very traditional oil and gas background. But it will be a completely lunatic position, I think, to just assume that the world is not changing or not going to change. And we have to think about the transition to a low-carbon future, perhaps even more than companies in other areas. I'm going to talk about Statoil's journey in this area. I'm not going to focus too much on India, though I will say at the outset that what India is doing in the area of renewable energy, as we've heard from other speakers, is fantastically interesting and fantastically important, I think, to companies like ours. And we're looking at it very closely and monitoring developments very closely. If you could just go back to the beginning of the presentation. That's the next one. On the slide there, you'll see what we call our vision. These are the three things that we're trying to achieve as a company. And I think when we think about the low-carbon future, we start with two premises. First of all, that despite the big changes that are happening in the world, for the foreseeable future, all energy systems in all countries around the world are still going to require a certain amount of oil and gas for the foreseeable future. The future for coal is less clear, certainly in certain markets like European markets, where coal's role in the energy mix is rapidly declining. For example, in power generation in the UK. Only a couple of years ago, coal had about 40% of UK power generation. It's now down to about 4 or 5%, and is declining still and will be phased out by the middle of the next decade. So these things can change quite quickly. Oil and gas, I think, will be around for a bit longer than coal, and I think we also recognise that coal will continue to play a big role, as the gentleman said over there, in economies like India for longer than they will in the traditional Western economies. But there is the fossil fuels are not going away tomorrow. However, and this is the second premise, we're absolutely clear that there is going to be a very significant transformation in the next few decades in every country in the world in the way in which energy systems are managed and run and consumed. And this will affect both the production of energy and the consumption of energy. And it will cover all the sectors of the energy mix, power, which has primarily been the focus up to date, but it will also be increasingly in the area of transport, increasingly in the area of heat, increasingly in the area of how industry is powered. And we need to address all four pillars of that. Because if you could go to the next slide, please. So what we're doing in Statoil is we have created a new business area within our business, headed up by a woman called Irena Romelhoff, who reports to our CEO. And her mandate is twofold. One, build a new renewables business. And secondly, make sure that our existing core business is as low carbon as possible. And I'm mainly going to talk about the renewables business and what we're doing there. But just on the second point, it's really important to understand that the oil and gas business itself is a problem in the climate change arena for two reasons. First of all, the products it produces, once consumed by their users, release carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. But also the actual process of extracting the oil and gas from the ground or from the sea is very carbon intensive, traditionally. And so one of the things we've been trying to do at Statoil is say, if we have to have oil and gas, and we have to for the moment, let's at least make the extraction of it as clean as possible. And so we have set ourselves very ambitious targets for reducing the amount of carbon dioxide produced with the extraction of oil and gas. At the moment, we're producing about 9 kilograms of carbon dioxide for each barrel of oil equivalent that we produce. That's about half the industry average. We think it can come down lower, and we also think other companies could do better in this space as well. But driving down the carbon involved with the extraction of oil and gas is a key part of the equation. So talking about building a renewables business, let's move on to the next mandate, the next slide, sorry. So our tradition, as I said at the beginning, is on the North Sea, in rather cold, hostile, offshore environments. So it's not surprising that we started our renewables journey in the offshore wind area, which is cold and hostile and windy and difficult. And we think our competitive advantage is that we can deliver major engineering projects in that sort of environment. And so we have been building an offshore wind business now for the best part of 8 or 9 years now. We started in Northwest Europe. Why did we start in Northwest Europe? Well, there are 3 reasons, really. One, it's, as many of you who have travelled to the UK or Germany or Norway know, it is windy, and if you're in the wind business, you want wind. Secondly, the North Sea is atypically shallow. You can actually have to go very far deep to hit the ground, so you can then put the pylons into the water, into the turbines into the ground. And thirdly, the governments of the region have put forward reasonably accommodating regulatory regimes. And one of the points that I want to make, I think, is that for governments, how you design your energy market systems, how you design your regulatory regimes is a key part of this equation, because it sends the right, if you get it right and you send the right signals to investors, the right signals to companies, the right signals to consumers, you get changes in behaviour and you get the developments of these sorts of industry. So we're now the 5th biggest player in the world in offshore wind, and we have ambitions to grow that business. And we think that offshore wind has a huge future, and will soon, although it's still not quite competitive with onshore wind and some of the other technologies like solar, it's already competitive in cost terms with nuclear in Europe. And we believe that the future will bring significant further cost reductions, and that it will be competitive with, at least with onshore wind, reasonably soon. Why would it be competitive? You'd think that building a wind farm in the middle of the ocean is much more expensive than doing it on a hill on land. The reason is very simple. You can deploy much bigger turbines. So the average size of the turbine on an onshore, the largest you'll get on an onshore wind platform is about 3 megawatts, and a lot of them are smaller than that. We're already working with 8 megawatt turbines offshore, and that will go up to 12, to 10 to 12 in the next few years, without any doubt, I think. So that will drive down costs and will make offshore wind, I think, extremely competitive with other forms of energy. And I'm very interested in what I've learned this week about India's plans to develop an offshore wind sector, and we'll certainly be looking at that carefully. The next slide, please. Yeah. One very quick point on this slide. Another future development for offshore wind is floating wind turbines, so that you can deploy them in seas which aren't as shallow. And once you get the floating wind technology right, you can think of all sorts of markets around the world where the continental shelf goes down very steeply, where you could deploy offshore wind. And we are very active in that. We've developed the first pilot park. Where we're going next? Well, we're looking at solar, and we're looking at onshore wind. And we can't just be an offshore wind company if we're going to go in this area. So we're looking at solar and onshore wind, and as I said, what you're doing in India is extremely interesting to us. And we're also very involved in the carbon capture and storage area. And then finally, we're also, because we want to get ahead of the technology, we're also created the largest corporate green venture fund, £200 million, for investing in new tech and small companies that need a bit of capital investment to help them develop new technologies. And we're already looking at opportunities for thinking about not just the next step in the renewables world, but the step after that and the step after that. So that's our story of how we are transforming from a traditional oil and gas company into a future-oriented energy company. My 2 messages, I think, well, the one is this point about energy market design. It's so important to get that right, then you create the right incentives. And the second issue is the point that the gentleman raised earlier about intermittency and how you manage that and how you ensure that you're that you create the right framework for the base load for when these intermittent technologies don't function, and we can perhaps explore that in the questions. Thank you.
Thank you very well. I think that our speakers are really good at keeping time and going straight to the point. But still, the program I was handed, an hour ago, it's really tight. So I will just ask you to continue in that spirit that we are trying to be as short as, not as possible, but still. Because we have still 3 people on this technical session, and that is Rajesh Mediratta, that will be the temperature of the current state of affairs in green power market in India.
Anjali.
Good morning, everyone. I'll be presenting on behalf of Rajesh Mediratta. And I have a brief presentation on RSE market and its current affair. Yeah. So in this presentation, we have a brief introduction to the RSE market and its current status, the RPO compliance status, and its way forward. Next slide, please. Yeah, so in order to promote RE in the country, there were several schemes which were launched. And as we see, during 90s, we had accelerated depreciation, which was done to improve more and more of capacity addition. Whereas in 2009, we saw GBI came into scheme, where it was more of like the more you produce, the more benefits you get. Later on, as we had got some capacity in the country, we moved on to the demand side, like how we can promote more of consumption on the side. So for that, we introduced RPO mechanism, wherein like whatever consumption you have a certain obligation to consume green energy over it. So what were the options? Next slide, please. So what are the options for the RE generators in this country? First is they can sell their power to the DISCOM on feed-in tariff, or they can sell their power at APPC and get registered for the RSE. Now those RSEs are traded at exchange. And the other option is that they can give their green power to the consumers like open access, captive producers, and independent users. So for that, they have 2 options. Either they can give bundled power on the preferential tariff or the negotiated tariffs. And second option is they can sell at the unbundled power in separate and RSE in separate. So in order to fulfill the RPO, next slide, please. Yeah. On the demand side, how the green power is going to be used, it is like either you get it into the feed-in tariff, or you purchase at the market price, or above your APPC price, you take RSEs from the green power market, and you can fulfill your RPO. Next slide. So now what are the salient features of RSEs? As we see, there are 2 kinds of RSEs. One is solar and the non-solar. Each RSE is denomination of 1 megawatt hour of power, and its shelf life is for 3 years. Now they are only traded at exchange apart from self-retention, and the transfer is only single transfer, and banking and borrowing is not allowed in this mechanism. And also the last time when the revision of the prices took place, so the revision also took place for the solar, where the floor price was 3,500 and forbearance was taken as 5,800. And non-solar was 1,500 to 3,300 gap. Next slide, please. So I'll just brief you like how, if a generator is into the market and they want to come for the RSE mechanism, what is the procedure to go through it? First, the project is accredited by the help of state nodal agency. And then the project is registered through NLDC, which is situated in Delhi. And then once the project is registered and energy injection starts, for every unit there is RSE issued, which can be traded at exchange. Now, talking about trading at exchange, we have a certain procedure, like every last Wednesday of the month, the RSE trade takes place, and it's a double-sided auction. 1 to 3 we have trading, and after that the report goes to the central agency where the RSEs are verified. If there is any defaulter, the list is produced, and then the confirmation comes by 4. And by 4:30, IEX finalizes its trade, and by 5 o'clock, the final results are displayed through a central agency, and by 6th the invoices raised. So now we'll go into the brief review, like what is the current market snapshot. Next slide, please. Currently, we have 4,227 megawatt of projects registered under REC project in non-solar, whereas for solar, we have 723 megawatt. And as we can see through this graph, there has been a gradual decline in the coming years, like 14, 15, and 15, 16. But then as very ambitious targets were set and the market also improvised, we saw again there was a growth in this year. And the capacity has started coming under REC mechanism again. And coming to the inventory, next slide, we have seen that today, like as of now, we have seen RECs issued are around 2.93 crores in non-solar segment, and for solar we have around 47 lakhs, out of which we have already traded 1.6 crores of REC on exchange. And inventory lies as of now as 1.35 crore in non-solar and 35 lakhs in solar. So the question is that, is there a very huge demand-supply gap that we have such high inventories in the market, or there is some disbalance between the buyer and consumer, or like what is the reason behind it? So we see that, next slide. Yeah, so we here see that since the compliance market in India is yearly, so the major buy comes during the last quarter of the year. So the graph is skewed towards the last quarter, and due to which there's a huge gap that what we get in the market and what is actually sold. Like we hardly get 1 to 3% of clearing ratio, and the rest of the inventory is lying in the market. So it's a serious concern. Next slide, please. And for the solar, as we saw that the prices came down from 9,300 to 3,300. There was a good demand which came into the market, and we see that the supply was same, but demand increased, and we have seen good trades in the last few months. Now, next slide, please. So what we can do about is that today the demand is not that good, whereas supply is in abundance. So the major reason behind that demand gap is that there is no effective RPO, and the major buyers in the market, which are DISCOMs, they are not ready to purchase RECs. There are hardly few DISCOMs which are the private entities who are participating, whereas the other, the bulk buyers are still not keen to buy RECs in the market. So there's a huge gap. Next slide, please. So we can see that the red line shows that this is the trade volume which we get in the market, whereas the green line shows that the trade is coming very down. So this kind of gap we have seen in the markets for the last 3-4 years. Next slide, please. And this is for the solar. Like because the floor price declined for the solar, there was a good demand, but still there's a huge gap in the market. Next slide, please. So talking about the RPO compliance status, why this gap is existing, the major reason is that we see in the buyer mix, the major portion of the RECs which are bought in the market is only by the commercial consumers, that is open access and the CPPs, whereas the bulk buyer are hardly 24 to 28% in solar and non-solar segment. So we have to push the regulatory regime in the country so that more and more the big buyers, the consumers who are taking in bulk power should come and buy green power at exchange. Next slide, please. So, but still we see that due to several orders which came last year regarding the REC mechanism and its improvision, we saw that there was a good increase in volume traded at exchange from 14-15 to 15-16. We saw nearly 100% growth, wherein this quarter we have seen a good growth of around 50% from the last year. So all this is because the Supreme Court judgment, High Court judgment which came regarding the RPO compliance, and they all promoted that all the consumer obligated entities should comply to their RPO, and due to which few of them have actually started purchasing. Next slide, please. So talking about like how, like what kind of market we have at exchange, we'll see that there are around 3,500 portfolios which are participating every day and every month, and generators are around 846, and we have nearly traded 1 crore of RECs in the past 4-5 years. Next slide, please. And also like as the green power market has to be promoted, we are also in plan to sell bundled power at exchange, and we are in process of proposing that, as CRC framework has come for scheduling wind power and solar power. So we are also in moment to do that. Next slide, please. And to look into the way forward, we see that enforcement of RPO and further reduction of solar RSE prices, and could be a formation of National Renewable Compliance Registry, which can make a good database of like which entities are complying, which are not complying, what is the current status of the entire country, which all this can be taken from one portal. So we propose that such kind of registry should be made, and also we propose that we should promote purchase of RSEs through CSR fund, because that is one way through which people can buy voluntary RSEs, and corporates can buy voluntary RSEs and promote green power. And also we are proposing to produce this green power market contract at exchanges, which will be looking forward for the next year, maybe we can launch. And we also suggest to promote voluntary RSE market in India by making green labeling or green organizations, green campaigns. That's all for now. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Mrs. Anjali Chaturvedi, I'm really sorry that I didn't have your name, but my surprising chairing of these sessions also included an old version, so thank you very much. The next one on the list, on the right list and on my right side, is Mr. Sushanti Chatterjee, Joint Chief, Central Electricity Regulation Commission.
Thank you and good morning everybody. My life has been made easier by the previous speakers from India, because some of the slides would be a repeat and I would skip wherever it is required. I've been asked to talk on the impact of the policy and regulatory frameworks on the promotion for RE, but before I do, please let us move very fast. Yeah, next one. Yeah. So, of course, the first is the context setting, and then what exactly are the policy initiatives and regulatory initiatives that India has taken over the over the decades, and then a very brief impact analysis. Some part of the impact she covered in her presentation on the REC market, and I'm going to give you an overview from the policy makers and regulators perspective. Next one. Yeah. So next. Yeah. In terms of the context, we know these are the two major drivers in India for promotion of the green energy security. We are increasingly getting dependent on import of fossil fuel. So this has led to a shift in our strategy and focus on the renewable and climate change. We have the INDC, intended nationally determined contribution commitment, which is also another important factor, which is why the country is moving towards high growth targets on the renewable segment. Next. This is a slide which was presented earlier. This is a brief snapshot of what is the total installed capacity that we have. Generation mix is pretty important on the left pie. I mean, why it is important in the context of discussion of the renewable is that we do not have the luxury of what we understand as flexible generation. We don't have much of gas. We do have hydro, but then we have abundance of coal, which is considered as a base load generation, which poses a big challenge to grid integration. As regulator, we are really trying to focus on the grid integration issues as I go forward. I'll try and touch upon this issue, but this particular slide is important in the context of understanding where India stands. In terms of the potential versus achievement, we have huge potential of renewable energy in the country. You could see in terms of achievement, we are still far behind that, and that makes the task of policymakers and regulators all the more challenging in terms of bridging this gap between the kind of potential that you have on RE and the achievement that you can achieve over a period of time. Next. This is another important characteristic of the renewable energy resources available in the country. The renewable energy resources are widely dispersed in the country. You could see on the, we have presented here the solar map and the wind map. By and large, the western part is rich in terms of the wind and solar, but then the power has to be transmitted or renewable purchase obligation has to be fulfilled by all the obligated entities across the country. How do you do that? That's basically a big challenge before the policymaker and the regulator. Next. So, given this context that I set, I'll try and focus on what the focus and the focal point in terms of the policy and regulation in this segment of the electricity sector is. So, the policies and the regulations that have been framed in India over the period for promotion of renewable energy are therefore, in fact, aimed at addressing these four broad issues which we have been facing. I mean, one is like a very high cost of generation. I mean, when you compare the cost of generation of wind and solar with the conventional energy sources, the cost still is higher. I mean, of course, there has been a decline, and I'm going to present briefly the kind of decline that we have achieved in terms of the solar prices over the period. Variability is the biggest challenge for any country, for India specifically. As I mentioned, we do not have the luxury of abundance of flexible generation. So how do we handle the variable if we have the ambitious target of 175 gigawatt by 2022? This is the biggest challenge, and as regulators, we are trying to find out solutions for addressing this variability. Dispersed location, as I said, that if you have the renewable energy resources concentrated in only one part of the country, but you have to transmit for that, you need evacuation infrastructure, or can you have some other mechanisms? In fact, REC came into being, this concept of renewable energy certificate came into being to address this particular issue of the dispersed location of the renewable energy sources. Next. So in terms of a very brief background of the policy initiatives first and the regulatory initiatives, and then we will see the kind of impact that it has had so far. Policy initiatives you can understand under two broad heads. First is basically in terms of the fiscal and financial incentives. The government has been providing capital subsidy to various emerging technologies. There are financial incentives like accelerated depreciation, which is generally used all over the world. Then there is a generation-based incentive, in fact, which has replaced in some parts the accelerated depreciation, then income tax holiday, excise duty exemption, customs duty. All these SOPs have been tried by the government of India to address the higher cost. As I said, that policy in the country has been driven by those four broad contours, and these fiscal and financial incentives have been aimed at addressing the higher cost and also to encourage investment. In terms of the legislative and executive initiatives, we have a very comprehensive legislation called the Electricity Act of 2003, which has provided a very broad architecture of how to promote and, in fact, renewable, and also given the specific responsibility to the regulator to promote renewable energy sources. In fact, under the Electricity Act 2003, we also have the policies, the National Electricity Policy and Tariff Policy, which also have further elaborated on the vision that you have in the Electricity Act 2003. Then there have been several policy announcements in terms of the NAPCC, what is called National Action Plan for Climate Change, that's a solar mission, the revised version. And then there are various schemes, and also auction has been initiated by the Government of India. Next one. Next, please. A brief snapshot of the NAPCC in 2009-10. This was the kind of target which was set 5% in energy terms by 2010. At that time, that was the kind of target that was set, and it was said that every year it will increase by 1% to reach 15% by 2020, and the seed of this tradable renewable energy certificates was sown through this NAPCC, National Action Plan for Climate Change. We have gone far ahead subsequent to the NAPCC. Next one. We have then the solar mission, which came in 2009 and 10 again, which had a very moderate level of target set, which was about 20 gigawatt by 2022, but then subsequently the target has been revised, and we have been talking about 175 gigawatt of revised target, which includes 100 gigawatt of solar and 60 gigawatt of wind. We have seen in the earlier presentation. I'll not waste much time on that. Next one. This is the broad architecture of the legislation, the Electricity Act 2003. There are several provisions. The idea is not to take you through various provisions, but then it's an overarching piece of legislation which has crafted the vision as to how the sector has to move going forward. What exactly are the issues which you need to handle, tackle going forward if you want to promote renewable energy sources. Next one. The revised tariff policy, which is basically an offshoot of the Electricity Act 2003, that has also set very ambitious target in terms of solar, 8% solar renewable. We have a separate set out or renewable purchase obligation for solar, which has been carved out in the policy. 8% excluding hydro, and Government of India also has given a very broad framework in terms of what is the renewable purchase obligation that you need to have in the country as a whole. It has talked about competitive or auction route for tariff discovery in the renewable energy segment. It has also addressed the issues of handling of renewable energy variability. It has talked about bundling of renewable energy. This is also bundling of renewable energy sources with the conventional sources is also a unique policy prescription which has been tried in India to sweeten the tariffs, because at the initial stage the tariffs the price of solar were very high, so they were bundled with the conventional power, and a bundled power was sold at a very sweetened price of, in Indian rupee terms, 4 rupee 50 paise, 5 rupees. So that's been a unique kind of a policy intervention which has been tried in India. Next. Of course, having come from the Regulatory Commission, I need to speak more on the regulatory initiatives, and these are the 4 broad areas of regulatory interventions which the law itself has carved out for the regulators to work on. The renewable purchase obligation is meant to create and generate demand, and then the feed-in tariff is to give certainty in terms of tariff, and also the must-run status for the renewable energy sources. The market development, a major function given to the regulator, and as part of our responsibility for market development in the electricity sector in general and in renewable in particular, we have created this framework called the REC, which she explained. And we also have been working on the complementary market design, which is critically important for the grid integration of the renewable energy. By complementary market design, we mean the ancillary services, we mean the shorter gate closure in the power exchanges, 24/7 power exchange market operation. And we have a grid code which we have put in place, which also charts out how to integrate the renewable energy going forward. So these are the RPO mechanisms she has already explained. It is an obligation which is cast on the obligated entities, and we have distribution companies and now also open access consumers and CPPs as the obligated entities who are made to purchase certain percentage of the total consumption from renewable energy sources. We have another instrument called feed-in tariff. We have been setting as regulators the feed-in tariffs for all these technologies over the period. Central Commission fixes, and so do the state level electricity regulatory commissions. Every year they do set that gives a lot of certainty to the investors. Next one. REC, the conceptual framework, she has already explained. This was introduced, as I said, to address the dispersed location of the renewable energy segment, because you have renewable energy resources available in one part of the country. How do the obligated entities in other parts of the country fulfill their RPO? And it's very difficult to transmit variable energy which is based on wind and solar. So you have had a concept of REC where a local generator can generate and sell electricity in the resource-rich state, sell the electricity component separately and the green attributes separately. And we created this market mechanism which is passing through a phase of transition. It's experiencing the pangs of transition, as we say, and we are trying to find out solutions to address some of the problems that she already highlighted. Next. Sorry.
You connect them in?
Yeah, just 2-3 minutes, yeah. So, so this is the key. In fact, of course, given the shortage of time, I would say that the grid integration, you need to create proper facilitative connectivity rules. You have to ensure market must-run status. And you also have to have a framework for forecasting, scheduling, and deviation settlement for infirm wind and solar. We have already put in place a framework for interstate. We also have created a flexibility into the system in terms of the operation of the thermal or coal-based generation, and we have revised the technical minimum operation level for thermal power plants to the level of 55%. Next. And we have gone through these debates in terms of the forecasting, scheduling, and deviation settlement, and have come up with a framework, and those who have been following the Indian market must be do that. Next one. We have also been working, as I mentioned, on the complementary market design. These two slides are critically important for us to understand in terms of the RE integration going forward. The costs are going to go down over a period of time, but how does it gel with the conventional energy sources which are otherwise firm is a big issue which the regulators have been trying to find an answer to. The next. Next, yeah. So in terms of the impact, as I mentioned earlier, solar tariff, we have seen massive decline in terms of the tariff over a period of time. This is the regulated tariff, which has come down, solar PV, from 22 US cents to about 8 US cents. Next. In terms of the tariffs which have been discovered through auction, it has witnessed further decline from about 16 US cents to about 6 US cents over the period of time. Next, and the last, only thing that I can say as part of the, regulatory fraternity, that India has a lot of promise and potential, and this is the story so far in terms of the growth of the RE sector in India. So you can see there is an exponential growth, and going forward, we believe that, we are committed to creating a very robust policy and regulatory framework to further have an exponential growth in the RE segment in future. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chatterjee, for this important contribution. We have to jump straight to Mrs. Puja, just first name. Malhotra, she's the Vice President of Statkraft.
Yeah, thank you so much. Honestly, I would have preferred to start with a joke with the serious gathering we have, but I understand your concern over the paucity of time, so I'll cut that short. We have our presentation here. We'll stick to the theme, but I'd like to introduce my colleague, Saptarishi, who represents Statkraft, who's an active trader and operating in the global certificate market, so he can share his experience of how the certificate markets for renewable energy have been working internationally. And that would be something interesting for all of us. But I can start by introducing Statkraft first, the next slide. So Statkraft is all state-owned Norwegian renewable energy company. It is large hydro, and thankfully internationally hydro is accepted as a renewable source, though not in India so far. But we are present across the globe with 56 terawatt hour of production annually. And but we are present largely in hydro, but also have reasonable presence in wind. And being present in India now, we can't look away from solar. So there are initiatives on that front as well. But today we are, next slide please, we're going to talk about how, what Anjali also touched upon, to use, support renewable energy as a CSR tool. And we know that consumption of renewable energy supports development of clean power production, which mitigates the greenhouse gas emissions. Also, through the RE100 initiative, the world's most influential companies have committed to 100% renewable power consumption. And, that's largely perhaps not always possible to have physically green power delivered to your doorstep or your meter connection. But then companies like Microsoft have gone out and become 100% renewable through various ways, investing in solar, having wind PPAs, but also then purchasing the remainder of their consumption through certificates. Yeah. The next slide, please. So Statkraft in India has presence in 3 areas. We have a presence in the hydropower, which my colleague Rahul will be speaking more about later. And I represent the market operations, wherein we are also a power trading licensee, but our core expertise is to then provide tailor-made customized solutions to consumers, end consumers, in meeting their not just energy demand, but also cost savings on energy and green power and becoming more sustainable. So that's our initiative here. So we use all of the areas, whether it's exchange, whether it's bundling of green and brown power, or bundling with certificate power. So these are various solutions that we use. But we also have recently established a joint venture company which is called Statkraft BLP Solar Solutions, which is looking into providing distributed energy solutions to the end consumers in solar segment. Yeah. But then I will give the floor to Seb.
Thank you very much. Well, a good portion of what I was going to say is already covered by previous speakers, and that happens quite often with me, so this time I'm prepared. So what Anjali focused on is the compliance market of renewable energy certificates, and what I'm going to talk about is the voluntary market. So it's a bit complementary, and in Europe it coexists, in India not yet. And I'm going to talk about how the voluntary market was in Europe and how it developed about. So as you can see from the map over here, 1 megawatt hour, the power is traded in the electricity market and the certificates traded in the certificates market. Now, unlike in India, where it's a very closed system, so the buyer and the seller can only trade once, and after that you extinguish the certificate. In Europe, you can change, the certificates change hands quite a few times till you actually cancel it yourself. So that's why Statkraft, what we do is we buy from renewable energy producers these certificates, and we are wholesale traders, so we sell to suppliers, electricity suppliers, and also directly to the retail users. So the electricity consumer over in India can just call up their supplier to ask for green power, and then they will use renewable energy certificates, or they call us and we would sell it to them as well. And so in the voluntary market, it's not really a subsidy scheme as the renewable energy certificates market in India. It's more of a tracking mechanism. So consumers over there have the choice, like you have also in India, to go ahead and buy these renewable energy certificates and claim that you're consuming renewable power. And I'd just like to add to what other speakers said before, that it's not always possible for us as consumers, retail consumers, to buy a PPA or to put on solar panels on a rooftop. We may not have one. And for us, it's really a good tool if we really want to show support for consumption of renewable energy, then we should buy these certificates. That's a good tool for us to do so. I'll move on to the next slide. So how the European market started. So the European Voluntary REC market is known as GOO, which stands for Guarantees of Origin. And guarantees of origin can be any source. So there are guarantees of origin for nuclear, guarantees of origin for coal, and any source of power over there. So it's not just renewable energy certificate. Now, how it started as a market initiative by an organization called REX International. And Statkraft was one of the founding members of the REC International organization. And we started it as created infrastructure for trading of the RECs from our power plants and other power plants. It started in 2001. And it was completely market-based, completely private, nothing to do with the government. Now, it became quite a success. So in 2009, it became a government initiative. So the EU directive was implemented, and it stated that the only way to claim renewable energy consumption in those countries who adopted this is via buying of this GOO or REC as in Europe. So you can have a PPA or you can have whatever you want, but that won't prove anything unless you buy a GOO. So that's the base, it became the bedrock. It's quite a upcoming market, so it shows a good transition from private to a government initiative. And the government initiative is only showing that how you claim renewable consumption. It's not mandating people to buy. So it's just laying the bedrock to show that, okay, you don't have any problem as to how you can claim renewable energy consumption. The growth rate has been quite good. It's above 10% year on year, and right now the market size is 360 terawatt hours. So it's quite a massive market at this point. If you go into the next slide, I can show some prices as to what they are trading at. So, 100-year large hydro would trade at 15 rupees per megawatt hour equivalent. And if you want something like with 6 years or younger hydro or any other plant, it could trade in 200. It can also go up to any amount that you want, depend on specialization. So all the logos you see over there are different labels by different organizations there. So once you have the bedrock, you can have you developed a full ecosystem of players coming in and selling their plant or selling a new concept and putting the label on the GOO and selling it to consumers. So therefore, we have over there energy suppliers who claim to be that we only purchase from new hydro. And that way, as a consumer, if you want to buy, okay, I only want to buy or support new hydro or new wind or offshore wind, then you can do that via this mechanism. So it's absolutely, it gives power to the consumers, this scheme. Yeah, the next slide would be the IREX standards. So, REX International, Statkraft started it in 2001 for Europe. Now it's a good success. So now through REX International, where I'm representing the board as a board member of REX International, we want to take it outside Europe to other countries where they don't have it. And that's why what we came up with is the IREX standard, which is monitored by the REX International and IREX Standard Foundation. And over there, we have a set of rules as to how you can implement in separate countries. So make it very robust system, so that you can't have any fraudulence or any in the market, which you don't. It's a very electronic-based system. So the good news is a lot of global reporting standards, like whether it's a greenhouse gas protocol or CDP has its own reporting standards, recognize this IREX, which stands for International REX, International Renewable Energy Certificates. So they say that if you buy this IREX from whichever country it is in, you can claim renewable energy production, renewable energy consumption. So which means RE100, which is like a group of 100 companies coming together and saying that, okay, we'll buy 100% of our renewable energy, of our electricity consumption from renewable energy source, can actually buy this IREX and claim that, hey, we bought renewable energy. And a lot of companies do that, buying these certificates or IREX. So we move on to the next slide. So that's the last slide, and that's our goal is. So here it shows which countries in the world have certificate system. And I've tried to highlight India, because over here in India, as you heard from before, there is the domestic REC market, and there is the complementing IREX system, which means that all the renewables which is not covered by the domestic REC and not in the RPO will be covered by IREX. So that's mostly large hydro right now, but that's what the concept is. Now, compared to some other countries, I mean, just to draw a parallel between the compliance and the voluntary market, is like countries like UK or Norway or Sweden, they have both where they coexisted. So you have a compliance voluntary mechanism. In Norway, it's called LCERTs. In UK, it's called ROC, Renewable Obligation Certificate, which helps companies like Statoil or Statkraft to have, give sort of guarantee that, okay, we are going to have this compliance market, which is going to be a subsidy scheme and support you. At the same time, you have the GO market. So for every megawatt hour produced over there, you get, of course, you sell the power in the market. You also get one GO and one compliance market REC. Because the concept is over there, you already have in the directive that the only way of consumption, of showing renewable energy consumption, is through the GO. So you can buy a ROC or a REC, but that's not going to make a difference because you have to buy a GO if you want to claim consumption. This is their way of separating the compliance market and the voluntary market. Now in India, there is not much compliance in the RPO, and that's why you have a long excess supply. But in Europe, mostly they're designed to be short, and that's why they don't want the voluntary players to maybe interfere with the compliance market, and that's why you can do that over there, and they have a directive. But
Thank
India,
you very much, Statkraft. Very enthusiastic, but I want to use 30 seconds.
That's the end of it.
Thank you. I just want to share with you, some are trying to live some of the things we are talking about today, because the Norwegian Embassy just moved into a new building some weeks ago, and there we have the solar on the roof, we have the water cooling from the ground, and we are looking into buying those certificates so we can try to do that. This is the second building in Delhi using that technology, and we are really proud of it.
Yeah, and also we have other companies, like till now it's mostly multinational with operations in India buying IREX from us, but we would like more and more domestic companies to also get into the system.
Thank you. Then we're moving into the last session, and we only have one speaker since we already heard Statoil, and that will also be Statkraft, Mr. Rahul Varshney. Please.
Good morning, everyone. While you upload the presentation,
we should.
Thank you. Do you have? Yeah, that's about it. I mean, the topic I had was hydro initiatives and opportunities between India and Norway. So I probably thought to come up with the 120 years of experience of Norway and a similar, likewise, experience of India. And in order, and to come up with a storyline there. So just give you a little bit of snapshot. Of course, I will in 10 minutes not run through the entire 120 years, but more about how we are similar in terms of our developments, how we have moved in this journey more or less on the similar lines, and then kind of demonstrate that where we are and where Norway is. And that's where the learning is primarily, and that's where, these opportunities could be tapped by India as well in terms of learning. Can I have the next slide? So the first of hydro projects in Norway, which is the journey of Statkraft, it's 120 years we completed last year, and we celebrated that, was in 1895 with Fossen was the first plant. And this was the first waterfall which government of Norway, Norwegian government bought, and then this plant was developed. Costed about, in Indian rupees, 200,000 rupees, and then came, a lot of private producers who kind of bought one waterfall after the other, fjord after fjord, and thereby the hydro development started and kind of picked up pace in Norway. The storyline for India is this first plant in 1898, almost similar time. This was surprisingly a 65 kilowatt Crompton Brunton single phase machines, 2.3 kV and 83.3 hertz. These alternators. In 1898, this was at that time also a public sector owned, and it was supplying to Darjeeling, residents of Darjeeling primarily, and in that particular area. So this particular plant, so almost the similar time. I have the same. Norway today has around 33,000 megawatt of installed capacity. Almost 96% is hydropower, 2% from wind, and 2% from thermal. 88% of the electricity production is publicly owned, and almost generates 145 terawatt hours every year. 50% of it is regulated. But in case of India, because of the size, of course, they are 5.2 million population. We are 1.2 billion. Our installed capacity today stands at 305 gigs, where 15% is just hydropower. It used to be 26% earlier, but it was predominated by coal, and India had been rich in reserves in coal, but then we took to our habit and we started importing coal and also still building coal plants, and didn't kind of get away with fossil until of late, where a lot of stress or a lot of efforts have been put in towards renewable, and today renewable share is the only share which is growing in India, and electricity production is around 1,000 terawatt hours, where 92% almost electricity is owned, publicly owned. However, this share is gradually depleting. Private sector is contributing quite a lot. Next slide, please. Now, in Norway, in 1991, there was a famous power sector reform. Transmission lines were defined as natural monopoly, and transmission production was separated. So Statkraft was separated with Statnet, and Statkraft was a generating entity, and Statnet became the transmission entity. And the Statnet was given also a TSO, or the system operator responsibility, and a Nord pool was established. Norway kind of struggled for almost, several years, almost 5 to 10 years to come to this particular reform, where instead of a single generator supplying to a single consumer, you had the choice. You have a free market where the market, discovers the price mechanism, and the consumer has had a choice in that terms. And can you have the next slide, please? Yeah. So why deregulation? I mean, because of course, and you will see quite a lot of analogy with India. There were more than 500 power companies in 1990. They were both power producers and transmission and distribution side. There were over-investment in production capacities. Many would agree today you have a similarity here. We have a lot of over-investment in production capacities. Lots of thermal sets are asked to back down today because of overproduction. Investments in low ratability primarily, so it's not the highest efficiency which gets delivered. It's probably also based on the lower ones were kind of rated higher, and thereby they were also producing. So, the reason was, because of this, all of it was the prices were increasing, and the consumers were not really benefiting out of either, the technology, or in terms of the added capacity with the free market competition. So that was the main significant driver of deregulation at that point in time. That was kind of the major steps, and 1999 to 2001, of course, Finland and Denmark also joined. Sweden joined in 1996, and that's how they created a Nord pool integrated market in Norway, in the Nordic market, which is functioning pretty efficiently. There were certain pain points. There were certain times where things were difficult. It was a kind of 8 years struggle, but ultimately today it's a well-functioning market. There is a balancing market, intraday market, ancillary services, and you have reliability, competition, as well as you get the best of tariffs with no outages and all. Well, because of India also had a similar kind of quantum shift from 2003 onwards with an Electricity Act of 2003 and the reforms going forward. But we have been kind of losing directions all throughout. I mean, we talk about 175 gigawatt of renewable energy till 2022, but where's the demand? If you consider a compounded annual average growth rate of 6%, have we kind of measured that we would be needing 175 gigawatts till 2022? For instance, similarly, 175 gigawatts is more of an infirm power or an intermittent power when we kind of talk about purely solar or wind into it. But I mean, the market actually requires flexible generation. Why aren't we kind of considering it? So there's been distortion all through, subsidies ranging from generation to transmission to distribution sector. Recently, transmission sector is marred with a lot of subsidies. So we are kind of doing a quick fix solutions all the time. Open access we have for short-term, medium-term, and long-term basis. But with this intermittent power, how will you deal with this? The other challenge on the transmission side is when it was hydro or thermal, it used to take 4 to 5 years. So the transmission guys would say, okay, you initiate the project, we will come up with the transmission line accordingly. But here in 6 months to 1 year's time, your generation is ready with solar and wind. So the transmission line has to pre-plan in order to kind of evacuate power. So there are challenges in all of this. And it's a totally regulated market at the moment. 97% of the energy was on a long-term PPA in the past. 175 gigawatt is also going to go into a long-term PPA because of revenue side horizon. So where is a free market working?
Sure.
Yeah, just a minute. So kind of, what we see is the initiatives and opportunities in terms of Norway learning is We need flexible generation. Hydro is the solution. We have more than 80,000 megawatts still to be, or even 120,000 for some say, still to be tapped, but 80,000 is with some peaking capacities which can be harnessed, tapped. It will serve in terms of ancillary services. I mean, that's where Norway has a lot of experience, and they have harnessed all the potential. In terms of risk management, efficient planning, efficient construction, as well as tunneling technologies, that's where Norway has a lot of experience, and Norwegian companies do have. Market deregulation, which is extremely important, otherwise price will never reflect the cost. There will be exchange, the rate would be 2 rupees, but we would be buying solar power at 4.5 and 5.5 rupees as well on a long-term PPAs. Whether that would be required during the peaking times, it's not known. So there will be a lot of thermal generators further asked to back down and pay fixed costs. So that's where deregulation is required, and a regional market. We have complementaries, we have lots of hydro generation possibilities in our regional market, which is Bhutan, Nepal, and we can tap, we can create a Nord Pool, we can create an exchange which will kind of boost the competition in the region, and there would be efficient exchanges from deficit to the surplus region. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much. We are now moving into the panel discussion, and the moderator will be Mr. Ramanathan, distinguished fellow in TERE. And I wonder if we should take the panelists up here, so it's easy, all 4 of you. Okay. So it's easier for everybody to see who it is, and I will move. And that is Dr. Amar Pal Singh, he was just speaking, Mr. Rahul Varshney. So you won't get that much time on the panel, no? And then there's Mr. Sanjeev Mehra and Mr. Anil Rastan. Thank you.
And what's the time available for us?
Well, you can just take a little bit to move into the tea.
5 minutes per, no, total time. How many speakers are there?
4.
So 20 minutes, 25 total time. Thank you. So let's go ahead. And I think I can still say good morning, not good afternoon. That's a good thing. So I would not like to take any of your time by way of any introductory remarks, except to say that we have all heard from the other participants about the energy transformation that is taking place in India. We are on a mission mode on adding renewable energy. Mr. Varshney talked about a number of challenges. I share with them. There is talk about flexibility in conventional power generation, including thermal these days. A lot of technological developments are being talked about. There is a question on storage. There is an interest on storage technology. There is equal interest on exploiting the flexibility in demand. So the entire, and the consumers are becoming producers. So the entire energy sector in India is undergoing a transformation. And renewable energy, as we all heard, because of its intermittency and variability, is adding certain complex issues to it. Now, how we manage it, how we achieve it, is the challenge. And last week I was in, I was in Germany as part of the India-Germany Energy Dialogue. And again, there's a lot of international interest on how we are going to tackle the issue of the march towards the green energy, or the clean energy, I would say. So Norway has been a partner with India, and we have been a lot of cooperation all these years. So this session, I hope we will get there's an eminent panel here, so we get some wise words on how we can utilize the cooperation with Norway to promote or achieve our mission. So, shall I go by the order? Then,
I'll take a band. I think the first person, because he's already made up the have questions.
Yeah, so only questions. So can I start with Mr. Anil Rasdan?
you've highlighted the points quite well. If we are going to have this ambitious new renewable targets of intermittent power, solar and wind, we will need to have a balancing mechanism. So that's why I thought that we should be laying an equal emphasis on developing either large hydro storage or medium hydro storage, or storage of this power in any case. The other thrust which we are doing and we should continue to do is that if we are going to produce smaller packets of energy and don't want to go much beyond what we are consuming at the moment, because it's a question of affordability also, and we want to get subsidies out of the system, because that's what is wrecking the distribution companies. We should lay an even greater emphasis on energy efficiency and go in for further improvement of efficiency, particularly in pumping devices and also temperature control. An area I think which we've not touched so far is geothermal. It's not on the plate today, but I think geothermal will have a role to play also in temperature control and in building architecture in the country, because the buildings seem to follow textbook models which may be irrelevant to your conditions and may be aggravating situations of temperature control rather than improving them. And mostly domestic architecture or traditional architecture has been abandoned in favor of aping some so-called modern concepts. I think the last point that I wish to make is that with this kind of intermittent energy coming in and with neighboring countries with diverse generation profiles, like Bhutan, entirely hydro, Nepal also hydro, Bangladesh will be entirely fossil fuel, all probability. Pakistan, of course, is a mix of that. Sri Lanka also will probably have a mix. We need to start working on, with agencies like Nord Pool, on an energy exchange for, particularly with emphasis on new renewables and other renewables, and I think which Rahul had also pointed out. At the moment, that's all I have to say.
Thank you. So, should I go to Amarpal Singh? Or, because his name, your name is listed first.
No problems. I'm Dr. Amarpal Singh. I'm Chief Executive of Punjab Energy Development Agency. Well, we have been able to contribute a lot towards the renewable energy sector in India. We were the first agency to have a grid-connected kilowatt scale plant inaugurated by then President Abdul Kalamji. And then the first megawatt grid-connected plant in the country, 1 megawatt, that was in Amritsar. And the first solar rooftop grid-connected, again done by us. So we have been pioneers in all those, showing the way forward, just tickling the imagination. And in fact, in the hydro sector also, in the mini hydro, Punjab has been the leader. We introduced the first time the siphoning technology in the country, and today we are 135 megawatts of mini micro hydels in our state. And we are looking for technology partners where we think Norway could be a very good partner with us to see how we can use the low head, which is now available with us, and on the velocity of the canals. We think there's a potential of another 200 megawatts. So we are looking for such technologies. And on the solar side, also presently we have exploited almost over 30% of our, you can say, whatever we can do. We have achieved 30% of that. That's the highest in the country. The nearest state is Rajasthan. That's around 11% of their potential they have achieved. We have achieved around 33%. So we were, 4 years ago, we were just 9 megawatts. We are going to touch 1,000 megawatts by December. So that was the basic scenario. Whenever I go to such, I'll be very informal because we have been having a very serious discussion on Chata and all those things. So the main thing which is missing is the human angle. Why are we here together today? Nobody talks about that. It's not about money. It's about the human being itself. And the nature which revolves around us. We think it revolves around us. Actually, we are in center of that. It doesn't revolve around us. So just a little 1-minute exercise. You will realize that what we are doing is so important that our children and their grandchildren will talk about these things, that there were people on this planet who used to talk about these things. We may succeed or we may fail. The time will tell. So imagine, just for 1 minute, close your eyes, everybody, and imagine there's no electricity. Electricity was never invented. How would life be? So I'll interrupt the exercise in between because you can't even imagine. Without electricity, life you can't even imagine. So when there was no electricity, human beings were competing with the natural animals. Once electricity came, it started competing with itself. And electricity is the biggest weapon, more potent than a nuclear weapon. With this electricity, we have been killing everybody. So now it's electricity which is killing us. So we need to, what we are doing today is thinking how to blunt that edge of electricity which is killing us. So I think if we have that passion inside us, then commercials will come second and renewable and environment will come first. But what happens is, because we understand the language of money, so we try to read through money what we want to do. So my request to all the participants here, that let's be humans first, let's think about our humanity, and then think about the money on basis of which we are talking. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Sanjeev, ma'am. I think we'll have questions in the end so that we have got a tab on the time.
Yeah. There's a problem in coming in and everybody is looking towards the watch. I represent Tata Power, and we have celebrated 100 years of completion of the first hydro plant near Mumbai. And that's what we call as sustainable development. And we just saw Rahul speaking about that all hydro plants in Norway is considered as green power. And why should we have a definition of less than 25 megawatt only in India as green power? So we need to discuss the issue of the policy or the basis of the green power. And we have examples on one side, Australia, Canada, Norway, where all the hydros are considered as green, to some intermediate where in Turkey, like 25 square kilometers of the catchment area is considered as green, which translates to sometimes 200 megawatt. So that's one thing we need to really relook into and see that what are the policy interventions we require to make sure that what is green. Because we are going in a right track as far as solar is concerned, wind is concerned, other green power is concerned. And some of the issues with Mr. Razdan very rightly pointed out is balancing. And here we have a solution of balancing along with the green power in hydro. And that's something we are completely missing. RPO, of course, the compliance is the main thing. The policy is good, but the compliance is the issue which, as a country, we are facing. Voluntary thing will come, but still open access itself is the issue. That some retailer wants to buy the type of electricity, maybe green electricity. Today, open access is not freely available. So that's again is an issue which needs a comprehensive solution for the country. So these are some of the major issues. Again, one of the things which we are seeing is that hydro projects as such are not being developed in last 8-10 years. And we have to go to the fundamentals of why it is not happening so. Perhaps we have to see what are the tariffs we have to really give, which will give incentive to this, because hydro brings solution to a lot of problems. And of course, we have to also see the environmental part of it, which needs to be taken care of. So these are some of the questions which I wanted to place to the distinguished gathering here. And we need to find a solution, then only we'll be able to find a comprehensive planning. 10 years back, our hydro was 23%. Today, it is less than 15%. And we don't know how we are going to balance with so much informed power coming in the grid.
Thank you. Would you like to add something more, or we'll have questions?
No, it's okay. I mean, just wanted to add what Sanjeev said, that one of the biggest difficulty what we are facing right now is because of policy reforms and adjusting towards those policy reforms, and the regulators then try to bring up solutions towards, managing those policy reforms. But the reforms itself, if those are kind of looked from some established models, some best practices, or experiences from other nations which have been kind of proven successful, that's where the policymakers should kind of look at establishing the future or setting up the course for the future for the country. And as Sanjeev also said, that we need flexible generation, and flexible generation is a must in the present scheme of things, and all that makes. For solar, there was kind of a hybrid mechanism which was presented, wherein thermal tariffs were low and NTPC was subsidizing solar tariffs in order to make a hybrid combinations. Hydro, of course, is very expensive initially, in the initial 5 to 7 years, but today Bhakra Bias is selling at 20 paise per unit, which is an example. So after 10 years or 15 years, the cost reduces substantially. So that's what solutions have to be figured out, and the country needs flexible generation for sure. Thank you.
I think we have got 5 minutes for questions. Please.
Can I ask?
Go ahead. Please.
There is one thing which I have observed. We say 44,000 megawatt of solar. This is complete misrepresentation of the fact, and when we compare with 305,000 megawatt of total power, because solar gives you power only for 1650 hours in a year at the rate of 4.5 hours. All renewable energies for that matter. This, in fact, solar, if you compare like to like, it would be only 1/5 of what it is about 8 to 9,000 megawatt. So I think it is very important for us to understand what we are talking about in terms of the whole reference of the country. That is very important, because it is essentially a misrepresentation. Just one more thing, what Sanjeev Nehra talked about the hydro. Storage hydro systems, maybe it is my personal opinion, but is probably the worst thing that can happen to an environment. And probably that is the reason why the government of India is saying that only the run-of-the-river systems, which are smaller, should be treated as renewable. You see, storage hydro systems create such a huge problem for the environment, and we can't advocate that. But no way. Run-of-the-river system is fine. It's okay. But storage has completely destroyed the environment. That's my opinion.
Just let me clarify that I never use the word storage hydro. When we are talking of run-of-river hydro, for around 4 months it gives round-the-clock power. But rest 8 months it gives peaking. Even run-of-river, whether we talk of Baglihar or whether we talk of any other project, it gives peaking power. It doesn't produce power at night time. So when we are talking of the peaking power versus or non-peak power, even today if you see power exchange, the price between peak and off-peak is 1:2 minimum. It's more. So value of power is there. And we need not displace everything. And that's what we said, like in Turkey, it is 15 square kilometer of catchment area. So we have to balance environment, and I mentioned that in my earlier thing also.
Just to add, more than 90% of India has only ROR projects.
Yes.
Peak ROR or ROR. That's, no storage possibility is available at the moment, and those storage projects, if at all, would be taken on a strategic basis, which is with Nepal primarily.
You're talking of current hydro
potential, which is available.
Existing.
Potential, which is available.
Potential. Then you're talking ROR. Then it can't be more than 25. It won't be. It will not be even. What? How can it
see the sir?
Government of India is not promoting the storage scheme. Government of India has realized that initially they have given the wrong advocacy that ROR is the solution. Yes. And initially we were beating the drum that we want to make only ROR scheme. Now if you take any hydro project to Government of India, they will ask you to give a certificate that storage scheme is not feasible here. So now government has identified that lot of storage schemes which were there in CWC has been converted to ROR. So in fact, either we don't want to go to storage, or if we want to go, we want to go with storage. So projects in Arunachal and in other streams, government want either you don't go for hydro, and if you are going for hydro, go with the storage schemes. It should not be purely ROR. Otherwise, it doesn't serve the purpose of all this storage and all those things.
Yeah, but also we did not have.
Please.
I think, see, this is quite a misconception, and I think it will be a myopic view if we look at some of these issues in that manner, because storage, hydro is, first of all, is water management and water storage. And water is going to be a bigger crisis than electricity. You talk of Bhakra Nangal, you talk of Terry, at least these are the projects in the north. The whole of Rajasthan, which was a desert, major portions of it are today agriculturally prosperous. People are able to lead lives which are respectable. Otherwise, they used to drink stored water in very insanitary conditions. I have served in those areas in neighboring Haryana in the 70s, and I can tell you that these were the conditions. Gujarat is getting water because of Sardar Sarovar and other dams, Indira Sagar, etc. upstream. We should balance these needs. Water, the first requirement is drinking, the second is agriculture, third is power. So when we do this kind of planning, we should do integrated planning. Now, if Uttarakhand, there was a problems, the problems were not because of storage schemes. Problems was because of probably negligent this run-of-the-river execution. It is also because of you violating the floodplains of the rivers. You're going and building right into there. The river has to expand. It has to burst its banks. So I would only urge that we should do a balanced view, and whatever we have to do, after all, we displace populations. Even for large urbanization schemes, we have displaced populations. Why blame only hydroelectric projects?
Sorry, I could add one point here. See, some 7 years back, we have brought out a booklet, CEA, TERI, and NSPC, under the Indian Hydropower Association. Is titled Realities and Myths, which have brought out case studies of about 8 or 10 projects in India, which has been executed, and how some of the myths, what is being talked about, how they have been managed or they don't exist. There's one. Second point on storage, of course it has got its challenges. With the climate change taking place, with the glacier melt that is taking place, the hydrology is totally changing. So water is also, we are getting stress on water. So unless we say everything of storage is bad, things are going to be difficult. Anything you want to add?
No, thanks.
It's okay. So if I can, I think, so.
I had one question.
I think, I know what is the time?
I think there's a question.
Just
one point I'd like to make. A colleague from J&K had spoken.
Wanting to come here.
And as Secretary Power, it was my observation that the state of J&K needs very intensive reevaluation of their small hydro potential. It is just a fraction of what probably exists, and no study, I think, in the recent past has been done to harness it.
Thank you very much, sir. Just one question to add upon which I wanted to, Mr. Mehra, who I hold at highest respect, Mr. Razdan, Mr. Rahul. There's been a great advocacy of late of trying to integrate the bigger hydro into the smaller hydro. One of the major observations I have, being one of the first developers out of J&K and working on trying to work around the mechanism, is really are the issues of small hydro addressed. I'm not against the bigger hydros. Malana has seen its share of having a good tariff initially up front so that other things, then you can go as low as 20 paisa. But all of a sudden, there's a huge mindset that we need to treat bigger hydro at par as a green industry with the smaller hydro. My problem there is effectively not taking away from the larger hydro. My problem is all of a sudden, RPO compliance is not happening. Smaller schemes are finding harder to come by day, and we're getting even more entangled between the open access, our state regulators and our distribution companies. So all of a sudden, there seems to be no way forward. So please add bigger hydro, yes, but think of a way forward for the smaller hydro, because all of a sudden, the tariff bases are making it absolutely difficult to survive given the current models. And unless and until we are reintegrating it, and there's been a lot of studies which Mr. Razdan is aware of, but there's very little done on ground. And the effective reasoning is that we're not being able to integrate. We're only speaking about possibilities, potentials. Indus Water Treaty, which is highly debatable right now, but how many projects have actually got stalled because of the Indus Water Treaty? I'm sorry, I don't know if we would want. So realistically, we need to reevaluate the parameter, and to promote something like small hydro, we have to reassess. We're talking big solar, we've got huge incentives, wind, in the past we've seen. Hydro has been left around and as if it's nowhere to be seen. We're feeling the treatment of a stepmother all of a sudden from all governments, whether it's bigger hydro or smaller. But we have to deal with it. Unless and until we deal with it, all hydro projects, whether big, whether small, we mentioned about the earlier projects, even Mohra in J&K, way back in 1900. Lower Jhelum, working for last 50, 60 years. Bagliar is more profitable than J&K Bank. The question is very simple, but somehow we fail to see the analysis and we're not getting the kind of support, policy-wise or financial, to pitch hydro as a serious contender. Thank you very much.
So I think we should conclude now.
Yeah, but just one
please.
observation, since it's a state representative speaking. I think a lot of damage has been done to hydro in the country by the states themselves, not by the central government, but federal government, because water and water power are state subjects, and the states have been just milking that sector by asking for free power, and that bidding for free power, excessive bidding, has made those projects unviable.
So if I can conclude, what I have understood is...
Excuse me.
Sorry, I think we are this time. Okay, please.
Just one last question.
One last.
And this question is for Mr. Mehra. Since you are leading a leading power trading company, and I understand that you have a lot of PPAs with hydropower players. At this point of time, the way I understand, all this power is currently going into the power exchange, and they are not even covering their debt cost. How do you see this situation in future, and no PPAs are being happening with the states? Even if they are feed-in tariffs, the states are not really signing any hydro PPAs. Do you see this situation changing sometime in the future? And what is, as a company, what's your strategy in terms of selling hydropower?
See, when we go to any buyer, whether any DISCOM, the first question they ask is, why should I buy a power where the first year tariff will be 4 rupees 75 paisa when I can get a power at 2 rupees 25 paisa, 2 rupees 50 paisa? So that's what we were talking of. If it is considered as green power, then there will be an obligation which will be met, and then there will be incentive. From 2006, there has not been any major sale of hydropower plants. There are states who want to buy power for 3 years or 5 years because it meets their peaking requirement. But they say, under which clause should I buy this power? How can I justify this tariff to my regulatory commission? So that's an issue. And we have been advocating with some of the states which are rich in hydro and others, even to MNRE, that there needs to be some policy. His points are also very valid, that a 10 megawatt power plant, the capital cost will not be same as 100 or 200 megawatt power plant. So these are some of the issues, and these are not a very simple solution. We need to really get into it. Medium term is not happening. Today, I'll tell you, 125 megawatt power plant, in winters, it generates only during peak hours, or if there's run of river, it generates only 50 megawatt. All the tenders which are under the deep platform comes for a minimum quantity of 50 megawatt. You can't even participate in those tenders, though the rating is 126 megawatt. So we have written to ministry to reduce. So it's a big subject. There are a lot of issues, lot of things we are doing advocacy, and we need to find a solution for it.
So thanks a lot. With your permission, if I may close the session. The main takeaway, what I find is we are all committed to promoting clean energy, number one. And number two, there are many challenges and issues. You have all stated that many times. Thirdly, Norway has talked about their rich experience in hydropower, the need for hydropower, and also the market, how the market is being utilized for hydropower. So these are good lessons, and I could say from Terry, we are very much interested in this area. We are taking up some studies, both looking at the supply options, the demand side options, and how best we can integrate or achieve the mission of promoting clean energy. So I hope Norway can contribute in a big way. And you talked about Bhutan and Nepal. I have also been talking in different forums how you can enlarge the market and utilize, if there are problems of hydro in India, how we can go about it, how we can see our hydro resources are promoted in a sustainable way, so there are no issues on that. So thanks a lot. And
I would like to thank everybody, and I'm Shruti Nair. I was pestering you with all the emails and calls. I'm from Terry. I would like to thank Avnish sir. He's from Innovation Norway, and Mr. Vivek from the Norway Embassy. Thank you so much for coming, all the speakers, all the participants. Tea is served in the first floor, so we can go there. And after that, we have the inaugural session where the president would address. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.